What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what should be a simple, harmless morning show appearance, only to discover he's about to face the most humiliating and disrespectful interrogation of his entire career? What happens when decades of professionalism and accomplishment crash head-on with condescension, arrogance, and outright disrespect? That's exactly what unfolded when Samuel L. Jackson, one of cinema's most commanding icons, sat down on The View and left Joy Behar speechless while the entire studio descended into pure shock. Before we dive into this fiery story, do me a quick favor. Please hit that like button, smash subscribe, and drop a comment below telling me which talk show host you think actually knows how to treat their guests with respect. Trust me, after you hear the jaw-dropping exchange that went down here, you'll have plenty to say. Now let's get back to the video. Samuel L. Jackson had been making the rounds promoting his latest film. It had been smooth sailing up to that point, the kind of press tour he could practically do in his sleep. Every stop so far had been filled with admiration and curiosity, where interviewers wanted to hear about his process, his craft, his experiences on set, and his long-standing legacy. Fans knew him not just as the man behind unforgettable characters, but as a living legend who had mastered the art of storytelling both on-screen and off. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared him for the storm waiting at The View. The morning itself had started like any other. Jackson arrived early, as a true professional always does. He went through hair and makeup, chatting casually with the staff. Everyone backstage admired him. Why? Because despite his tough-as-nails screen presence, he's known for treating everyone with respect. Assistants, stagehands, production managers, they all light up around him because he makes people feel valued. That's what true greatness looks like. "Mr. Jackson, we're ready for you," the stage manager called out, gesturing toward the glowing set. Jackson straightened his jacket, gave a nod of acknowledgement, and walked out with that unmistakable stride that has made him one of the most recognizable figures in the entire industry. The audience instantly erupted in applause. Cheers filled the room as Samuel L. Jackson, the man, the myth, the legend, took his seat. He waved, smiled, and adjusted his mic with the calm confidence of someone who's done this 1,000 times before. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed him warmly, her smile genuine. "We're here with the incredible Samuel L. Jackson," she said with pride. And Jackson, in his classic commanding voice, replied, "Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be on The View." The crowd loved it, the other hosts leaned in excitedly, and everything felt like the beginning of yet another smooth interview. But in that moment, as Jackson scanned the panel, he noticed something in Joy Behar's expression, something sharp, something off, a smirk that felt less welcoming and more like a warning. Still, Jackson carried on with his trademark composure. Sonny Hostin leaned in and asked the kind of thoughtful question he expected. "You've been in the business for decades now. What keeps you passionate about acting?" Jackson's eyes lit up. This was his element. He started explaining how every role still challenges him, how even after years in the game he keeps learning, keeps evolving, keeps finding new ways to connect with audiences. The audience leaned in with admiration. It was the kind of answer only someone like Jackson could deliver. But then, out of nowhere, Joy Behar cut in like a hammer-shattering glass. "That's fascinating," she said, her voice sharp and dismissive. "But let's talk about something more relevant. Don't you think at your age you should be considering retirement?" The room froze. The audience fell dead silent. The other hosts shifted in their chairs uncomfortably, as if they had just witnessed someone step far over a line that should never be crossed. Jackson's smile faltered ever so slightly, but his professionalism held firm. He gave her the chance to walk it back, to soften the blow. Instead, Joy doubled down with cruel precision. "I mean, you're what, 75 now?" she pressed. "Isn't it time to step aside and let younger actors have their chance?" Hollywood is changing, and maybe it's time the older generation accepted that their moment has passed. The air in the studio grew heavier with every word. Whoopi tried to step in with a gentle redirect, but Joy waved her off as if even her own co-hosts didn't matter. "I think it's a fair question," she insisted smugly. "Hanging on too long just looks embarrassing, doesn't it?" That was it. The atmosphere shifted. The cameras zoomed tighter, sensing history in the making. The audience sat stunned, unsure if they should gasp, clap, or simply hold their breath. And Samuel L. Jackson, the man who had stared down villains on screen and commanded respect everywhere he went, sat back, studying Joy with a look that made the entire room lean forward in suspense. "Let me make sure I understand you," he said, his tone calm but icy. "You're suggesting that I, after over 4 decades in this industry, should retire because I'm too old?" His voice didn't rise, but everyone in the room felt the pressure. It was the kind of calm that was more dangerous than shouting. Joy smirked, trying to brush it off with a laugh. "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds harsh. But yes, essentially. How many more action movies can you really make? Don't you think audiences are tired of the same old faces?" The words, "the same old faces," echoed through the studio like a slap heard around the world. People in the audience exchanged stunned glances, mouths open in disbelief. Even the camera crew, who had seen it all, shifted uncomfortably as if they couldn't believe this was happening on live television. Jackson's voice dropped lower, quieter, but deadlier. "The same old faces," he repeated slowly. His eyes narrowed. Then, with surgical precision, he leaned forward and asked a question that sliced through the tension like a blade. "Joy, how long have you been on this show?" Joy puffed up her chest with pride, completely oblivious to the trap she had just walked into. 24 years, she declared confidently, "and I'm proud of every one of them." Jackson nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact. 24 years. Impressive. And you're what now, 81? The room gasped. The crowd shifted in their seats. "But somehow my age is the problem here." His words landed like thunderclaps. Joy's face flushed red, but instead of pulling back, she doubled down. "That's completely different," she snapped. "Television hosting doesn't have the same physical demands as being an action star. We rely on wit and intelligence, not running around shooting guns." Jackson leaned forward, his expression stone cold. "So what you're saying is that what I do requires no intelligence, no wit, no craft, that I'm just some old man waving a gun around for a paycheck?" His calm tone shook the room more than shouting ever could. The other hosts froze in disbelief. Whoopi buried her face in her hands. Sunny Hostin darted panicked looks toward the producers, silently begging them to cut to commercial. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the desk. But Joy? Joy smirked, twisting the knife deeper. "Let's be honest, Samuel. Action movies aren't exactly Shakespeare, are they?" The audience audibly gasped. Everyone in the room knew the line had been crossed. And then it happened. Samuel L. Jackson leaned in, eyes locked on Joy, and his voice dropped into that legendary tone audiences across the world knew well. "Not Shakespeare?" he repeated. "Let me educate you, since you seem to think you know so much about my profession." He paused, letting the silence squeeze the air out of the room. "I've performed Shakespeare. I've played King Lear and Macbeth on Broadway. I studied dramatic arts at Morehouse College. I spent years in theater before Hollywood ever called my name. But you wouldn't know that, would you?" For the first time, Joy's smirk faltered, but still, she couldn't stop herself. "Well, that's ancient history. What have you done lately that shows real acting skill?" The audience erupted in murmurs. Whoopi looked like she might faint. Sunny dropped her head into her hands. Sarah stared wide-eyed at the floor. This wasn't just disrespect. This was reckless. Jackson's voice grew quieter, sharper. "Ancient history?" He nodded slowly. "So my Tony nomination means nothing? My Academy Award nomination means nothing? Working with Spike Lee, Quentin Tarantino, Martin Scorsese, all irrelevant because Joy Behar has decided my career doesn't matter." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some gasping, others shaking their heads. Jackson stood abruptly, towering over the panel. His presence was commanding, his energy electric. The room fell dead silent. "My current place in Hollywood?" he thundered. "Let's talk about that. Last year alone, I starred in 3 films that grossed over $800 million worldwide. This year, I have 4 projects in production. Directors call me, studios write roles for me, and you're sitting there telling me I should step aside?" Joy tried to interject, but Jackson raised a hand, silencing her instantly. No. You wanted this conversation, so let's have it. You want to talk about relevance? Let's discuss what you've contributed in 24 years of sitting at this desk, besides cheap shots, divisive remarks, and manufactured controversy. The audience gasped again. Jackson wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was dismantling her entire persona, piece by piece. I've been a voice for important issues, Joy snapped back weakly, clinging to control. A voice for important issues? Jackson shot back, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Like telling a working actor to retire because you've decided he's too old? Like dismissing decades of dedication and discipline because you think you know better? That's your important contribution? The studio went silent again, the kind of silence that only comes when history is being made. Whoopi finally tried to step in. Samuel, maybe we should all take a breath. But Jackson turned to her, his tone soft but firm. No, Whoopi. I respect you. You've earned your place at this table with talent, with real achievements, with decades of hard work. But this? He gestured at Joy. This is what's wrong with media today. The audience began to clap softly, as if in solidarity. Jackson's words were slicing through the noise, raw and unfiltered. You sit here, Joy, every morning, passing judgment on people whose shoes you couldn't walk in for 5 minutes. His voice rose slightly, finally breaking through the tension like a crack of lightning. You spout opinions about industries you've never worked in, about crafts you've never studied, about people whose accomplishments make yours look like footnotes. Joy tried to fire back, her voice trembling. I've been in entertainment longer than you. I was doing stand-up comedy when you were still... When I was still what? Jackson snapped, stepping forward, his presence overwhelming. When I was still struggling with addiction? Fighting for every role? Proving myself every single day? While you sat behind a desk with cue cards, tearing down people you could never hope to. Match? The revelation hit the studio like a bomb. Jackson had just peeled back a raw, personal truth about his past, exposing vulnerability while holding Joy accountable. The room was frozen, breathless. You want to know the difference between us? He pressed, his voice low but deadly serious. I've spent 50 years perfecting my craft. Studying, working, failing, rising, mastering. You've spent 24 years reading from cue cards and insulting people whose accomplishments you'll never understand. Joy's face was scarlet now, her smirk gone, her composure shattered. You can't talk to me like that, she blurted. This is my show. Jackson let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. Your show? This is The View. It doesn't say the Joy Behar Show on that sign outside. Even if it did, that wouldn't give you the right to disrespect your guests. Then he leaned forward, his hands gripping the table, his eyes locked onto hers. Here's the real problem, Joy. You've confused having a microphone with having wisdom. You've mistaken a platform for authority. But let me tell you, real authority doesn't come from sitting behind a desk throwing cheap shots. It comes from mastering your craft, from decades of excellence, from respect earned, not demanded. The studio was absolutely electric. Audience members leaned forward in stunned silence. Even the camera operators seemed frozen in disbelief, their lenses capturing a live demolition of Joy Behar's credibility, piece by piece. Joy, her voice weak now, tried again. I was just asking legitimate questions. Jackson cut her off with a sharp glare. Legitimate? That wasn't a question, Joy. That was a cheap shot wrapped in arrogance. And when people like you get called out, you hide behind the excuse of being too sensitive. Well, let me tell you something. Respect isn't sensitivity. Respect is the bare minimum. The crowd erupted into applause, unable to hold back any longer. Jackson stood tall, his voice carrying through the studio like a force of nature. You don't earn respect by insulting people. You don't build credibility by trying to tear down legends, and you don't get to decide when someone else's time is over, because I assure you, my time is far from done. The applause grew louder, echoing through the studio, and for the first time in her career, Joy Behar sat silent, with nothing left to say. Jackson's voice carried like a verdict, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything the show had ever experienced. He began unhooking his microphone, the click of the clasp sounding like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. You know what the saddest part is, Joy? He said, his tone suddenly colder. You had a chance today to show respect. You had a chance to ask questions that mattered. Instead, you chose to be small. You chose to be cruel. And cruelty disguised as journalism is still cruelty. Joy tried to salvage herself with one last desperate plea. "Samuel, I didn't mean," but Jackson cut her off, his words sharp and final. "Don't you dare backpedal now. You meant every word, and that tells me everything I need to know about you." He placed the microphone on the desk, deliberately, like he was leaving behind the last piece of patience he had. "You see, Joy, I've built a 50-year career on talent, discipline, and respect. You've built 24 years on sound bites and smirks. And yet, somehow you think you're the authority here. That's not just arrogance, that's delusion." The audience gasped, some clapping nervously, others stunned into silence. Whoopi stared down at the desk. Sunny bit her lip. Sarah had her hands over her face. Jackson turned toward the exit but then paused, his final words burning through the air. "The truth is, Joy, people like you aren't interviewers. You're provocateurs. You don't seek truth, you seek spectacle. And maybe that's what daytime TV wants, but don't confuse it for integrity. And don't ever confuse it for respect." He stepped off the stage, the applause swelling behind him, and the cameras caught Joy's face, pale, shaken, and stripped of her usual smugness. For the first time in her career, Joy Behar wasn't the one leaving others speechless. She was the one left exposed. And that single image, Joy frozen in silence while Samuel L. Jackson walked away with dignity intact, became the most controversial moment The View had ever broadcast. And there you have it, one of the most shocking live TV moments in recent memory. Samuel L. Jackson didn't just defend himself, he exposed the hypocrisy right in front of millions. What do you think about the way he handled this fiery showdown? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. And don't forget, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another explosive breakdown like this.